So in his video, I think, you know, Jonathan Cobb wanted to argue for a similar sort of middle path here. And, the last thing I just want to say in response to him is that he brings up Bohm, David Bohm, the physicist, who articulated worked out a version of Einstein's relativistic cosmology that accounted for the spooky action at a distance, so-called, that what Einstein called the spooky action at a distance that is right at the center of um, quantum physics, with sort of entanglement between distant particles and so on. Bohm was able to articulate a consistent mathematical formulation of relativity theory and quantum theory, wherein quantum effects were explained by reference to um, a sort of pilot wave um, that underlies the spatiotemporal field within which we perceive and conceive the world. And that this pilot wave, or this hidden variable um, that's implicit to, or um, what's the word that Bohm uses? Not implicit, but implicate, right? There's the implicate order that's beyond space and time that harmonizes all things. It's in some ways like Leibniz's pre-established harmony, and that so long as we posit the existence of such a implicate, or pre-established harmony between what appear to us to be separate things, then the continuity of relativity and the discontinuity of quantum theory can line up, because really everything's continuous. Now, Bohm is clearly a genius, and I think wanted to preserve a sense of a creative universe, but he ends up siding with Einstein, and trying to reduce away the spontaneity and the discontinuity and the creativity that quantum phenomena and quantum theory revealed to us. And Whitehead would have disagreed with Bohm's interpretation of relativity theory. Whitehead tried to preserve a form of cosmic or cosmogenetic creativity that isn't possible if we accept Einstein's block universe, as Bohm does. So ultimately, though Bohm talked a lot about the importance of creativity at the level of human consciousness in order to really understand the way nature works, his ontology, his cosmology, prohibits creativity. For him, all time, all future time, in some way already exists in the fourth dimension of spatialized time. Whereas for Whitehead, the future does not exist. There are certain definite possibilities that may be realized given the actual world as it exists now in the living present, but those possibilities have not yet been actualized. And so for Whitehead, there is an open-endedness, as I said, to the universe that admits the open-ended, ongoing, creative dimension of things themselves, and that there's a sort of, an evolution, or an intrinsic, erotic lure towards harmony or beauty that unfolds during the course of this creative process. And so, in other words, there's a sort of arc to time, and it's not like time has a simple beginning or an ending. I don't think Whitehead would say that, and he would want to contextualize the Big Bang theory of physical cosmology in a larger metaphysical context to say that, well, space and time as we know them began at this event called the Big Bang, but it wouldn't make any sense to talk about space-time as we know them beginning if there wasn't another kind of time prior to that Big Bang. But nonetheless, there does seem to be a texture to time, an evolutionary arc, a telos, not a design in the sense of there being some sort of an external architect that drew up the blueprints beforehand and then executed the plan, sort of creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing narrative that has gained prominence during the modern period, especially in the Western Judeo-Christian world. Whitehead wants to reject that approach, which underlied, Augustine's theology and Newton's physics equally. Whitehead wants to move away from that idea of a transcendent designer and instead talk about an immanent lure, a cosmic eros, desire that brings separate things into social relationships with one another. So for Whitehead, the ultimate things are, yes, actual occasions, but just as ultimate as actual occasions are the societies that actual occasions form. So all the objects that we talk about, whether they're scientific objects like protons, neutrons, electrons, atoms, or biological, objects like organisms that we perceive at our macroscopic level, all of these are societies of actual occasions, and so they're not ontologically ultimate for Whitehead, but they are real, actual creatures that make a difference in how the next moment of cosmogenesis unfolds. And I think for Whitehead, God is a creature like any other. Maybe God is the primordial and all-encompassing creature, the creature, the sort of, God is the soul of this world, and so has a greater experiential reach than any of us, any of we finite creatures. But God is still a creature for Whitehead. God is involved in the world. And I think this not only changes our religious outlook, obviously, it's a sort of incarnational religion, but it also changes our scientific outlook in that we can no longer think of the non-human world, the universe, nature, as a sort of machine made up of randomly colliding parts. Well, maybe not randomly colliding, but somehow law-abiding atomic particles. Rather we see the universe as an internally related organic process wherein each part is bound up with every other part through relationships of feeling, common fields of feeling. So it's not just some sort of solipsistic internal feelings. I think feelings are really fields. And when we talk about how subjectivity permeates the physical world, we shouldn't think of it as simply located inside the nervous systems of particular organisms. I think experience and feeling, when we talk about these in a pan-experiential context, like in Whitehead's cosmology, we have to think of experience not in the Cartesian sense as inside my skull somewhere in the pineal gland or something, but rather as a field, as a in some sense extended and permeating between, moving between bodies rather than located inside of bodies. Feeling is in between, not inside. It's not the predicate of a substance or the accidents or qualities of a substance. I think the whole way of thinking about reality in terms of substances that Harman wants to sort of resurrect is something that Whitehead wants us to be very careful about, because he thinks that our language, as it has been constructed in this subject predicate form, deceives us when it comes to metaphysics, because we end up mistaking the structure of our grammar for the structure of reality. And I wonder if Harman, in sort of advocating for a sort of ontological throwback to Aristotle's substance quality ontology, I wonder if maybe we need to revisit the limitations of our own language and not, I think realism is important, but maybe Harman's realism takes the structure of our grammar a little bit too much for granted, and that perhaps to do metaphysics in a realistic way, to talk about what there is rather than what we can know, maybe we need to reflect a bit more and be more creative with the way that we talk, with the language that we express our ontology with. And it's not to say that Harman isn't a beautiful writer, and I think his style is the most interesting part about his philosophy. It's not the ontological axioms or principles, but the style with which he writes that really draws me to Harman. And that's important, I think, because stylistically Whitehead has his moments, but he can be pretty dry and abstract at other moments as well. So these are two thinkers that I would want to continue to think with, and in an effort to think with them, I think it's important that we be as clear and succinct as we can about what each of them is actually saying. And in the case of Harman's critique of Whitehead, I think, I'd like to see more textual support, from Whitehead's writings for the point of view that Harman is advocating, that Whitehead holds, because, I just don't see it. So anyways, so much for being succinct. Thanks for listening.